The edge of space near the Kelvar system began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement on a summer day. Admiral Helen Carter stood frozen on the bridge of her observation ship as every alarm system started screaming warnings at once. She had been in space for 23 years and had never seen readings like this. The fabric of reality itself seemed to be tearing open right in front of them. Lieutenant Jake Morrison worked frantically at his console as sweat beaded on his forehead. He kept recalibrating the sensors because the numbers made absolutely no sense. Ships emerged from hyperspace all the time, but nothing ever looked like this. The energy readings were climbing higher and higher until they went completely off the scale. He turned to face his admiral with wide eyes full of disbelief. The spatial distortion grew larger and larger, like a wound being ripped open in the darkness of space. Through that impossible tear came something that made Helen's breath catch in her throat. The vessel that pushed its way into normal space was beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. It was 8 full kilometers from bow to stern, and its mass was greater than her entire fleet combined. The hull was midnight black and seemed to drink in the light from nearby stars rather than reflect it back. Every line and angle of its design spoke of brutal efficiency and overwhelming power. Helen had served with the Galactic Council for her entire career and had seen the great dreadnoughts of the Zrakian Empire. She had witnessed the massive carrier groups of the Korthan Dominion. This ship made all of them look like toys. It hung in space like a predator carved from darkness itself. The design was angular and sharp with no wasted curves or decorative elements. This was a weapon that had been given the shape of a ship. Communications officer Lisa Grant turned from her station with a face gone pale as snow. Her hand shook slightly as she worked to process what her systems were telling her. The unknown vessel was broadcasting on every known frequency in over 400 different languages. The message was simple and direct. It identified itself as the Earth Defense Force battleship Titan. It claimed to represent humanity. That single word sent shockwaves through everyone on the bridge. Humanity had withdrawn from galactic politics over 2 centuries ago, after signing the Treaty of New Geneva. They had closed their borders and refused all contact with the outside galaxy. Most species had forgotten they even existed. The few who remembered thought of them as a minor race that had chosen isolation over participation in galactic affairs. They were considered irrelevant to the great games of power and empire that dominated the galaxy. But this ship was anything but irrelevant. Helen stared at the massive vessel and felt her understanding of galactic power shift beneath her feet. Humanity had not been hiding in fear. They had been building. The question was, what else had they built while the rest of the galaxy ignored them? Jake managed to complete a full sensor sweep, and the results made him question his own instruments. The ship's power output was staggering. Its hull was composed of materials that his scanners could not fully identify. There were weapon systems built into that dark surface that he could detect but not understand. The shield generators alone were more powerful than anything in the Council database. This was not just a large ship. This was technology that surpassed anything the known galaxy possessed. Helen forced herself to think clearly despite the shock. She needed to report this immediately to Council Command. The entire political structure of the galaxy was based on known power relationships. The Zrakian Empire dominated through military might. The Korthan Dominion controlled vast resources. The Vel Confederacy maintained influence through trade and economics. Everyone knew where they stood in the hierarchy. This ship changed everything about that careful balance. She opened a direct channel to the Titan and waited as her transmission crossed the distance between ships. The response came quickly. A human male appeared on her view screen wearing a dark uniform with silver insignia. His face was calm and composed, as if emerging from 200 years of isolation. In a ship that dwarfed planets was perfectly normal. He identified himself as Commander Kyle Patterson of the Earth Defense Force. Helen introduced herself and tried to keep her voice steady. She asked the question that every species in the galaxy would be demanding answers to. What were humanity's intentions? Why had they emerged now after so long? What did they want? Kyle's response was measured and deliberate. He explained that humanity had spent 2 centuries watching the galaxy from behind their borders. They had observed how the strong preyed upon the weak. They had seen peaceful species conquered and enslaved. They had witnessed endless cycles of war and exploitation. Humanity had withdrawn not because they were afraid, but because they needed time to prepare. Time to ensure they would never be victims. Time to build the capability to defend themselves and others. who could not defend themselves. The Titan was humanity's answer to the question of how to survive in a galaxy where power was the only language that mattered. Kyle made it clear that humanity sought peace, but they would enforce that peace from a position of strength. The days of pushing humanity around were over before they could even begin. Helen felt a chill run down her spine as she absorbed his words. This was not a diplomatic mission. This was a declaration. Humanity was announcing to the entire galaxy that they were now a major power whether anyone liked it or not. The Titan was proof of their capability and their resolve. As the conversation ended, Helen immediately opened emergency channels to Galactic Council Command. She transmitted every scan and recording from the encounter. Within hours, the news would spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Every empire and every species would know that humanity had returned. The political calculations of centuries would need to be revised. Military strategists would scramble to assess this new threat or potential ally. Helen looked back at the Titan hanging in space like a dark promise. She understood that she had just witnessed a turning point in galactic history. Everything that came before this moment belonged to the old era. Everything that came after would be shaped by humanity's emergence. The galaxy had operated under certain assumptions about power and capability. Those assumptions had just been shattered. Helen wondered if the established powers would accept this new reality peacefully, or if they would choose to test humanity's strength. She suspected it would not take long to find out. The Titan waited silently in the void as the galaxy began to realize that everything had changed. Commander Kyle Patterson walked through the primary operations center of the Titan with steady, confident steps. Around him, 300 crew members worked at their stations, monitoring every system on the massive warship. The operations center was a marvel of human engineering with holographic displays floating in the air, showing real-time data from thousands of sensors. Everything was functioning exactly as designed. 200 years of focused development had led to this moment. Chief Engineer Amy Richardson called out status reports from her engineering station. All reactors were operating at 30% power, which was more than enough for current operations. The ship could increase to full power in less than 90 seconds if needed. Weapon systems were in standby mode, ready to activate instantly. Defensive shield grids were fully operational and could withstand punishment that would vaporize any other known vessel. Every backup system had its own backup. The Titan had been built with redundancy upon redundancy because humanity learned long ago that you could never be too prepared. Communications specialist Greg Hayes turned to face Kyle with a slight smile on his face. They were being hailed by dozens of ships from multiple species. Council observers wanted explanations. Srakian patrol vessels demanded identification. Independent traders were asking if humanity was open for business again. Everyone in the system wanted to know who the Titan was and what humanity intended to do. Kyle gave simple orders. Greg was to respond to all inquiries with the standard protocol they had prepared. Humanity was conducting a peaceful survey mission. They had every right to be in neutral space. Any aggressive action would be met with appropriate defensive measures. Kyle did not elaborate on what those measures might entail. It was better to leave that to the imagination of potential adversaries. The main view screen displayed multiple incoming transmission requests. Kyle authorized a connection to Admiral Helen Carter since she represented the Galactic Council. Her face appeared looking tired but determined. She asked Kyle to confirm his vessel's origins and intentions. There was hope in her eyes that another human might be an ally in the complicated politics of the Council. Kyle explained that humanity had indeed been isolated for 2 centuries, but that isolation had been purposeful. Humanity withdrew from galactic affairs because they recognized a fundamental truth. The galaxy respected only strength. Peaceful species without military power were conquered or exploited. Diplomatic niceties meant nothing without the capability to defend one's interests. So humanity had focused all their resources on building that capability. Helen asked the obvious question: why reveal themselves now? What had changed? Kyle's answer was straightforward. Humanity's defensive preparations were complete. They had built not just the Titan, but an entire fleet of advanced warships. They had developed weapons and defensive systems that surpassed anything the known galaxy possessed. They had trained crews and developed tactics for fighting against numerically superior forces. Most importantly, they had identified dozens of smaller species who were suffering under the domination of the major empires. Humanity intended to offer protection to those who wanted it. The statement hung in the air between them. Helen understood immediately what Kyle was proposing. Humanity was not just announcing their own strength. They were challenging the established order of the galaxy. The major empires had built their power on the exploitation of weaker species. Humanity was offering an alternative, protection in exchange for alliance. It was a direct threat to the Empire's way of doing business. Helen warned Kyle that this approach would make enemies. The Zrakian Empire would see humanity as a threat to their dominance. The Korthan Dominion would view any alliance network as competition for resources. The Vel Confederacy would worry about trade disruptions. Powerful forces would unite against humanity if they felt threatened enough. Kyle acknowledged the risk but remained confident. Humanity had studied galactic politics for 2 centuries. They understood how the empires thought and operated. The great powers were used to dealing with species who feared them. They used intimidation and overwhelming force to get their way. But humanity did not fear them. The Titan alone could stand against any fleet the empires currently possessed. And the Titan was only the beginning. Tactical Officer Ryan Brooks interrupted to report that several Zrakian vessels were moving into position around the Titan. They were not yet taking aggressive action, but their intent was clear. They wanted to surround the human ship and demonstrate that the Zrakian Empire was still the dominant military power in this region of space. Kyle watched the tactical display with calm interest. 15 Zrakian heavy cruisers and 40 escort ships were forming an encirclement pattern. It was a standard intimidation tactic. The Zrakians believed that superior numbers would force humanity to back down or withdraw. They were about to learn how wrong that assumption was. He ordered Greg to open a channel to the Zrakian fleet commander. The reptilian face of Fleet Marshal Dax Horvan appeared on screen. Horvan was a decorated military officer with dozens of successful campaigns to his credit. He looked at Kyle with barely concealed contempt. In his view, humanity was an inferior species that had hidden in isolation because they lacked the courage to compete with real powers. Horvan demanded that the Titan withdraw from the region immediately. This space fell under Zrakian sphere of influence. Unannounced vessels of such size represented a threat to imperial security. If the Titan did not leave within the hour, the Zrakian fleet would escort it out by force if necessary. Kyle let a long silence hang before responding. He spoke in a quiet voice that somehow carried more weight than any shout could. The Titan was in neutral space and had every right to be there. Humanity was not subject to Zrakian authority. If Horvan wished to attempt forcing them to leave, he was welcome to try. Kyle suggested that such an attempt would not end well for the Zrakian fleet. Horvan's eyes blazed with anger at the perceived insult. No one spoke to a Zrakian fleet marshal that way. He cut the transmission and began issuing orders to his ships. They would teach these arrogant humans a lesson about power and respect. Kyle turned to Ryan and gave simple instructions. When the Zrakians opened fire, the Titan would defend itself. Weapons were to target enemy ship systems only. No casualties unless absolutely necessary. Humanity wanted to demonstrate capability, not start a war. But they would show the galaxy what happened when someone challenged them. The crew of the Titan went to battle stations smoothly and efficiently. They had trained for this scenario countless times in simulation. Now they would prove that humanity's long isolation had produced something the galaxy was not prepared for. A species that combined advanced technology with tactical doctrine, designed specifically to counter numerically superior forces. Kyle watched the tactical display as the Zrakian ships finished their encirclement. Horvan was about to make a decision that would echo across the galaxy. In a few moments, the balance of power that had existed for centuries would shift forever. The age of empire dominance through military intimidation was about to end. Humanity had emerged from the void, and they would not be pushed back into obscurity. The Titan's weapon systems came online with a low hum of barely contained energy. Kyle waited calmly for what came next. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within 6 hours of the Titan's appearance. Delegates from over 200 species filled the massive chamber on the neutral station of Concordia. The air hummed with anxious conversation and barely concealed fear. Ambassador Lucas Grant sat calmly in the human delegation section, while chaos swirled around him. He had been waiting for this moment his entire diplomatic career. Humanity's carefully laid plans were finally being set in motion. High Commander Zarask of the Zrakian Empire stood at the central podium with his scales flushed dark red in anger. His voice boomed through the chamber as he accused humanity of violating numerous treaties and threatening galactic peace. The Titan represented a clear violation of agreements that limited human military development. Such a massive warship could only have one purpose, and that was aggressive expansion and conquest. Lucas waited patiently for his turn to speak. He knew that Zrask was trying to paint humanity as the aggressor before anyone could examine the facts. It was a standard political tactic. Define the narrative early and force your opponents to defend themselves. But Lucas had prepared for this approach. Humanity had studied galactic politics for 2 centuries, while the rest of the galaxy forgot they existed. When Lucas finally stood to address the council, his voice was calm and measured. He began by correcting several key facts in Zrask's accusations. The treaties limiting human military development had expired 140 years ago. Humanity had chosen not to renew them, which was their sovereign right. During the following century and a half, humanity had violated no laws or agreements. They had simply developed their defensive capabilities within their own territory. Zrask interrupted to demand how humanity could call the Titan a defensive vessel. Ships that size were built for power projection and planetary assault. No one needed that much firepower for defense. Lucas smiled slightly and delivered the response he had been planning for years. Perhaps the Zrakians needed such ships for conquest, but humanity had different priorities. The Titan was designed to ensure that no foreign power could threaten human worlds or human interests. It was built to make any potential aggressor think twice before attacking humanity or its allies. If that massive capability deterred war, then it had already succeeded in its defensive mission. The word allies caused immediate uproar in the chamber. Counselor Nina Foster stood beside Lucas to elaborate. She explained that during humanity's isolation, they had maintained observation posts throughout the galaxy. They had watched as smaller species were conquered and exploited by the major empires. They had seen peaceful civilizations enslaved and their resources stripped away. Humanity had not withdrawn out of fear, but out of disgust at how the galaxy operated. Nina continued in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber. Humanity had decided that when they returned to galactic affairs, they would offer an alternative to the current system. They would extend protection to species who wanted it. Not protection in exchange for subservience, but genuine mutual defense agreements between equals. Already 47 minor species had accepted preliminary agreements with human representatives. That announcement caused an even greater stir. 47 species represented a significant block of votes in the council. More importantly, it meant that humanity had been working diplomatically throughout the galaxy, while everyone thought they were isolated. The major empires had been outmaneuvered before they even realized the game had begun. Delegate Prime Velkos of the Corthan Dominion rose to speak. His species controlled vast mining operations across dozens of systems. Many of those operations had been established on worlds belonging to species too weak to resist. He asked pointedly what would happen if Dominion interests conflicted with these new human alliances. Lucas answered without hesitation. Humanity would honor its agreements. If a species under human protection was threatened, then humanity would respond appropriately. He suggested that the Dominion might want to review which of its operations were based on legitimate agreements versus forced extraction. Humanity would not tolerate the exploitation of its allies. The implications were clear to everyone in the chamber. Humanity was drawing a line and daring the major powers to cross it. They were backed by technology that surpassed anything the galaxy had seen, and by a willingness to use that technology in defense of others. The empires that had dominated for centuries suddenly faced a force they could not intimidate or ignore. Counselor Sarah Mitchell of the Terran delegation provided additional context. She explained that humanity had learned hard lessons from its early contact with galactic civilization. When humanity first joined the Council, they had believed in diplomacy and peaceful cooperation. They thought that reason and good faith could resolve conflicts. They had been proven wrong repeatedly. Small human colonies had been attacked by pirates while the Council debated proper responses. Human trade ships had been seized by empires claiming dubious rights. Human diplomats had been insulted and dismissed as representatives of an irrelevant species. Sarah's voice grew harder as she recounted this history. Humanity had withdrawn to avoid becoming victims like so many other minor species. They had spent 2 centuries building the strength necessary to ensure they would never be victimized again. The Titan was not a threat to peaceful species. It was a promise to aggressive empires that humanity would no longer tolerate being pushed around. Ambassador Karis of the Vel Confederacy took a different approach. Her species dominated galactic trade through a vast network of commercial agreements. She suggested that perhaps accommodation could be reached. If humanity wanted influence, they could achieve it through economic partnerships rather than military confrontation. The Confederacy would be happy to discuss trade arrangements and commercial cooperation. Lucas appreciated the diplomatic approach, but his answer was firm. Humanity was interested in fair trade based on mutual benefit. They would not participate in the exploitative economic practices that characterized much of galactic commerce. Species under human protection would not be forced into unfavorable trade agreements. The Confederacy could adapt to these new conditions or find itself with fewer trading partners. High Commander Zarask returned to the podium with barely controlled rage. He declared that the Zarakian Empire would not accept humanity's presumption. If humanity wanted to protect minor species, then they would have to prove they could do so. The Empire would test human resolve and human capability. Zarask suggested that Fleet Marshal Horvan's forces in the Kelvar system would provide that test very soon. Lucas felt his stomach tighten, but kept his expression neutral. He knew that Horvan commanded a substantial battle group. The confrontation that everyone had feared was about to happen. He could only hope that the Titan would perform as designed and that casualties could be minimized. Humanity wanted to demonstrate strength, not start a full-scale war. Nina Foster stood again and addressed the Council with clear warning in her voice. If the Zarakian Empire chose to attack human vessels, then they would bear full responsibility for the consequences. Humanity would defend itself with all available force. The Council and the galaxy would witness what happened when someone challenged humanity's new position. She suggested that perhaps it would be better for all involved if cooler heads prevailed. But Lucas could see that Zarask was beyond reason. The Zarakian commander had built his entire career on military dominance and intimidation. He could not back down from this challenge without losing face before the entire galaxy. Pride and arrogance would drive him to confront the Titan regardless of the risk. Lucas realized that the next few hours would determine whether humanity's return to galactic affairs would be peaceful or violent. The council session dissolved into chaos as delegates argued and accusations flew back and forth. Lucas and his team quietly left the chamber. They had said what needed to be said. Now everything depended on Commander Kyle Patterson and the crew of the Titan. Humanity had prepared for this moment, but preparation could only go so far. Soon they would learn if 2 centuries of isolation and development had produced the capability they needed to survive in a hostile galaxy. Fleet Marshal Dax Horvan stood on the bridge of his flagship Vengeance and watched his battle group move into attack formation. 15 heavy cruisers and 40 escort vessels responded to his commands with practiced precision. This was a force that had conquered systems and broken the resistance of entire civilizations. The idea that one human ship could stand against them was laughable. Horvan intended to teach humanity a lesson about the cost of arrogance. His tactical officer provided continuous updates as the fleet tightened its encirclement of the Titan. Every ship had its weapons charged and targeting systems locked on the massive human vessel. Horvan had ordered them to fire simultaneously for maximum impact. Even if the Titan had impressive shields, no defensive system could withstand the combined firepower of 55 warships firing at once. He expected to see the human ship's shields collapse within seconds of the initial barrage. Aboard the Titan commander, Kyle Patterson watched the Zarakian fleet complete its attack formation with calm interest. Tactical Officer Ryan Brooks provided detailed analysis of each enemy vessel's capabilities. The Zarakian heavy cruisers were armed with plasma lance beams that could punch through conventional armor. The escort ships carried missile batteries and point defense systems. Together, they represented enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. Against any other ship in the galaxy, this force would be overwhelming, but the Titan was not any other ship. Ryan's analysis showed that even if every Zrakian weapon hit simultaneously, the Titan's shields would absorb the damage without strain. The shield generators alone were powered by reactors more advanced than anything the Zrakians possessed. Chief Engineer Amy Richardson confirmed that all defensive systems were operating at peak efficiency. The Titan could withstand this attack and dozens more like it without taking any actual damage. Kyle opened a final communication channel to Horvin. He spoke quietly, but his words carried weight. He told the Zrakian commander that this did not need to happen. Humanity sought no conflict with the Empire. If Horvin ordered his ships to stand down, both sides could walk away without bloodshed. There was no shame in choosing peace over pointless violence. Horvin's response was filled with contempt. He told Kyle that humanity would learn what it meant to challenge the Zrakian Empire. No species spoke to a fleet marshal with such disrespect and walked away unpunished. The Empire had crushed greater threats than one oversized human vessel. Within moments, the Titan would be destroyed, and humanity would remember its place in the galactic order. Kyle closed the channel and turned to his crew. His orders were clear and specific. When the Zrakians opened fire, the Titan would defend itself, but would use minimum necessary force. Weapon systems were to target enemy ship armaments only. The goal was to disable the Zrakian fleet, not destroy it. Humanity wanted to demonstrate capability, not commit massacre. If they could win this fight without killing anyone, it would send a much stronger message than simple destruction. Horvin gave the order to fire. 55 ships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Plasma beams bright as small stars converged on the Titan from every angle. Missile salvos streaked across the darkness, trailing fire. Energy weapons created a web of destruction focused on one target. The combined firepower was staggering. Space itself seemed to burn with the intensity of the assault. The Titan's defensive shields absorbed every shot without even flickering. The bridge crew watched their displays calmly as enough energy to vaporize a city washed over their vessel harmlessly. Not a single alarm sounded. The shield strength indicators barely registered the attack. It was like trying to harm a battleship by throwing stones at it. On the Vengeance, Horvin stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His sensors showed that the human ship was completely undamaged. The shields had not even weakened. It was impossible. No defensive system could withstand that much focused firepower. He ordered his weapons officers to fire again and keep firing until those shields collapsed. The Zrakian fleet poured salvo after salvo into the Titan. Plasma lances hammered the shields continuously. Missiles detonated in brilliant flashes. Energy weapons created a constant barrage. The assault continued for 30 seconds that felt like an eternity. When it finally paused due to weapon overheating, the Titan remained completely intact. The shields showed absolutely no sign of weakening. Kyle gave a single-word command. Return fire. What happened next would be analyzed and studied for generations. The Titan's point defense lasers were designed to intercept incoming missiles and fighters. They were precision instruments meant for shooting down small, fast-moving targets. Kyle ordered them used against the Zrakian fleet's weapon systems. It was like using a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. Invisible laser beams reached out across the gulf of space with surgical accuracy. In exactly 4 seconds, every weapon mount on every Zrakian ship was either severed or melted into useless slag. Heavy cruiser plasma lances were cut away from their mounting points. Escort ship missile tubes were fused shut by precisely applied heat. Point defense clusters were reduced to molten metal. 55 warships found themselves completely disarmed without losing a single crew member. The precision was terrifying. The Titan had identified and neutralized over 2,000 individual weapon systems in 4 seconds. The targeting computers and fire control systems required to accomplish that feat were beyond anything the Zrakian Empire possessed. Their ships were now helpless. They could not attack, and their engines were too slow to escape if the Titan decided to pursue. Horvin stood frozen on his bridge as damage reports flooded in from every ship in his fleet. All weapons offline. No casualties, but complete loss of offensive capability. His mighty battle group had been reduced to helplessness in seconds. The human ship had not even used its main weapons. Those massive turrets and missile batteries remained silent. The Titan had disabled his entire fleet using only its point defense systems. Kyle opened the communication channel again. His voice was calm and almost gentle. He told Horvin that this demonstration was complete. The fleet marshal had learned why humanity did not fear the Zrakian Empire. Now he would take this lesson back to his commanders. Humanity could have destroyed every ship in the battle group easily. Instead, they chose to simply remove the threat while preserving lives. That choice showed both capability and restraint. Kyle suggested that the Empire consider carefully before testing humanity again. Horvin wanted to rage and threaten, but the words died in his throat. He had been utterly defeated without the human ship even making a serious effort. His career was likely over. The shame of this loss would follow him forever. But he was alive and his crews were alive. The humans could have killed them all and chose not to. That mercy made the demonstration of power even more effective. He ordered his crippled fleet to withdraw from the system. Aboard dozens of observation vessels scattered throughout the Kelvar system, representatives from multiple species had witnessed the entire encounter. News of what happened spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Within hours, every species and every empire would know. The Zrakian battle group had attacked the Titan with overwhelming force and had been casually defeated. Humanity had demonstrated both technological superiority and tactical doctrine that rendered conventional military power obsolete. Admiral Helen Carter watched from her observation ship with mixed emotions. She was glad that lives had been preserved. The Titan could have turned that battle into a slaughter but chose restraint instead. At the same time, she understood the implications. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted dramatically. The empires that had dominated through military might suddenly found their advantage erased. Humanity had not just defeated a Zrakian fleet. They had made traditional naval warfare irrelevant. Kyle stood on the Titan's bridge and felt the weight of what had just happened. Humanity had crossed a threshold. They were no longer a minor species hiding in isolation. They were now a major power, whether anyone wanted that or not. Other confrontations would come as the empires tested humanity's resolve and capabilities. But this first demonstration had sent the message that needed to be sent. Humanity would defend itself and its allies with overwhelming force if necessary, but would choose mercy when possible. The Titan's engines hummed with barely contained power as the great ship continued its patrol. The galaxy had learned its first lesson about humanity's return. Kyle suspected many more lessons would be needed before the empires truly understood the new reality they faced. 3 months had passed since the Titan emerged from the void, and the galaxy was still adjusting to the new reality. Admiral Helen Carter sat across from Commander Kyle Patterson in a private meeting room on the neutral diplomatic station. The Galactic Council had asked her to establish ongoing communication with humanity's representatives. What had started as a simple liaison assignment had evolved into something far more significant. Helen looked at the human commander with curiosity and respect. Kyle appeared relaxed, but she knew he was constantly aware of everything happening around him. That combination of casual demeanor and sharp awareness seemed to characterize humanity's entire approach. They projected confidence without arrogance and strength without aggression. It was unsettling to the empires who were used to more predictable adversaries. She began by stating the obvious. Humanity had disrupted 200 years of established order. The major empires were furious at having their dominance challenged. Smaller species were celebrating because they finally had protection from exploitation. The galaxy did not know what to make of humanity's return. Some saw them as saviors, while others viewed them as a new threat that might prove worse than the old. Empires, Kyle acknowledged that change, was always difficult, especially for those who benefited from the existing system. The old order was built on predation, where the strong took what they wanted from the weak. Humanity was offering something different, a system where strength served justice instead of ambition, where species could develop without fear of conquest, where peace was possible because the cost of war was too high for anyone to bear. Helen raised the concern that many in the council shared. What if the empires united against humanity? The Zrakian Empire alone had been humiliated, but the Korthan Dominion and the Vel Confederacy had not yet committed to any course of action. If all 3 major powers combined their forces, they could field thousands of ships. Even the Titan could not stand against such overwhelming numbers. Kyle's slight smile suggested he had been waiting for this question. He asked Helen if she truly believed those empires could effectively unite. They had competing interests and deep mutual distrust. The Zerakians valued military glory above all else. The Korthans cared only about resource extraction. The Vel pursued profit through trade. Getting them to cooperate on anything was nearly impossible. Getting them to risk their fleets in a war against an opponent of unknown capability was even less likely. But Kyle admitted that even if the empires did unite, humanity had prepared for that scenario. The Titan was not their only vessel. It was simply the only one they had revealed. During 2 centuries of isolation, humanity had built not one ship but an entire fleet. 30 capital ships of the Titan class, hundreds of heavy cruisers and destroyers, thousands of fighters and support craft, all equipped with technology that surpassed anything the known galaxy possessed. Helen felt her breath catch as she processed that information. 30 ships like the Titan meant that humanity possessed more concentrated firepower than any empire in the galaxy. The balance of power had not just shifted. It had been completely overturned. No wonder Kyle seemed so confident. Humanity had prepared for every contingency. Kyle continued by explaining humanity's diplomatic efforts. During their isolation, they had maintained covert observation posts throughout the galaxy. They had identified species suffering under imperial domination, small civilizations that wanted to develop peacefully, but were constantly threatened by larger powers. Humanity had approached 47 such species with an offer of mutual defense agreements. The agreements were simple and straightforward. Humanity would guarantee the security of these species against external threats. In exchange, the species would agree to cooperate on matters of mutual interest and maintain open diplomatic relations with Earth. There was no requirement for tribute or subservience. No demands for exclusive trade rights. Just honest cooperation between equals. For species tired of being exploited, the offer was impossible to refuse. Helen understood the genius of the strategy. Humanity was not building an empire. They were constructing a network of allied species bound together by mutual interest and shared security. It gave smaller civilizations a genuine alternative to either submitting to empires or remaining vulnerable. It also created a block of aligned species that represented significant political power within the Galactic Council. She asked the hard question. What if war came anyway? What if the empires decided that destroying humanity was worth any cost? What if they were willing to sacrifice thousands of ships to eliminate this threat to their dominance? Kyle's expression grew somber. He admitted that war was always possible. There were always those who preferred conflict to adaptation. If the empires chose war, then humanity would fight with everything they had. But the empires needed to understand that humanity fought differently than they expected. Traditional galactic warfare involved large fleets engaging in direct combat. Victory went to whoever could field more ships and replace losses faster. Humanity had studied that approach and rejected it. Instead, they developed tactics based on precision strike capability and defensive superiority. Human ships could engage enemy fleets from ranges where return fire was impossible. Human point defense could intercept any missile or fighter attack. Human shield technology could withstand sustained bombardment that would destroy conventional vessels. In any direct engagement, humanity would win not through superior numbers but through overwhelming technological advantage. More importantly, humanity was prepared to take the war to enemy home systems if necessary. The empires relied on subject species for resources and labor. Those subject species were already being contacted by human agents. Many would welcome liberation from imperial rule. A war against humanity would potentially spark uprisings across imperial territory. The empires would find themselves fighting on multiple fronts against both human fleets and internal rebellions. Kyle made it clear that humanity preferred peace, but would accept war if forced into it. The choice belonged to the empires. They could adapt to the new reality where they no longer dominated weaker species, or they could fight to preserve their power and face the consequences of that choice. Either way, the age of predatory empires was ending. Helen absorbed all of this information with growing concern and hope. Concern because the potential for catastrophic war was very real. Hope because humanity's emergence might finally end centuries of exploitation and suffering. She had spent her career trying to make the Galactic Council live up to its ideals of cooperation and justice. Those ideals had been hollow while the strong preyed on the weak with impunity. Humanity was offering to enforce those ideals with strength that could not be ignored. She asked Kyle about humanity's ultimate goals. Did they want to rule the galaxy? Were they seeking to replace the old empires with a human empire? What was the endgame of all this power and preparation? Kyle's answer was thoughtful and measured. Humanity did not want to rule anyone. They had seen how empire corrupted those who possessed it. The empires started with high ideals, but power eventually twisted them into the oppressors they had once fought against. Humanity's goal was simpler and more fundamental. They wanted a galaxy where species could develop without fear, where strength protected rather than exploited, where peace was possible because war was too costly to wage casually. The Titan and the fleet that accompanied it were tools to achieve that goal. They existed to deter aggression and protect the vulnerable. Humanity would use them when necessary, but always with restraint and always in defense of others. The new order they envisioned was not based on human dominance, but on mutual security and cooperation between equals. In the months that followed, Kyle's words began to manifest in reality. The major empires grudgingly accepted that they could no longer operate with impunity. Wars of conquest became rarer, as potential aggressors had to consider whether human intervention might tip the balance. Protected species flourished as they could finally focus on development instead of survival. Trade became more equitable as the threat of military coercion was removed from negotiations. The Titan continued its patrol of the galactic frontier. Additional human warships began appearing in regions where they were needed. The fleet remained mostly out of sight, but its presence was felt everywhere. Pirates found that attacking shipping lanes protected by humanity was a quick way to be hunted down. Warlords discovered that enslaving populations in human-protected territory brought swift retribution. The galaxy slowly learned that humanity's promises were backed by capability and will. Not everything was peaceful. There were confrontations and skirmishes as the empires tested boundaries, and some chose to fight rather than adapt. But each test ended the same way. Human ships proved superior in every engagement. Human tactics rendered conventional military power obsolete. Human resolve showed that they would defend their allies regardless of the cost. 5 years after the Titan's emergence, the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Galactic Council had real enforcement power for the first time in its history. Smaller species had genuine security guarantees. The major empires had learned to cooperate rather than dominate. War had not been eliminated, but it had been made costly enough that diplomacy became the preferred O.